Well, hello, and welcome to the Cory Doctorow podcast. And I'm Cory Doctorow, as ever, reading to you today, as ever, from my 2005 novel, Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town. And as ever, before I do, I have a little news about where I've been and where I'm going and what's going on. So, you heard my last podcast from behind the wall of jet lag in a hotel room in Times Square in New York. I'm pleased to say that the event itself was stellar. I was at the O'Reilly Tools of Change for Publishing conference, which was well attended by a large number of people from all ends of the publishing industry, including independent writers and representatives of large publishers, quantitative researchers who've been looking into the effects of illegal downloading on book sales, and so on and so forth. Really, a very wide gamut of people, including librarians, archivists, illustrators, publishers, you name it. I gave a talk that I expect will be coming online as a video soon about the fact that the major distribution channels for digital books, that's electronic texts and electronic audio, digital audio, are controlled by Amazon, and that Amazon has a mandatory DRM policy for them. That is to say, if you're a copyright holder and you want to distribute your books without DRM, Amazon won't handle them. And coined what I've called Doctorow's Law. Anytime someone puts a lock on something you own and won't give you the key, they're not doing it for your benefit. And that point really seemed to resonate with the publishers, and certainly got picked up a lot through the course of the conference. I started using Twitter at the conference, something I haven't really done much of. Ev sent me an invite to it when he launched it, and I kind of, added a couple of followers, played with it for a while. Realized that it was, I forget who coined this term, but it was one more social telephone I had to answer, and it might have been Seth Godin, and just left it to one side. But for a specific purpose, it was really interesting. I sat there at TOC and read the TOC hashtag and then contributed to it. I found to my surprise that I had several thousand followers, some of whom seemed to be very upset to suddenly have this logorrheic eruption from my end of the Twitterverse. But if that's not what you want to read, then unsubscribe. While I was away in New York, my daughter Posey, who has just turned 1, began to walk. Of course, this is always how it goes. You leave home for 4 days and the kid hits a developmental milestone. But I'm home again, and I'm watching her walk and giggle and laugh and tell jokes and just be funny and sweet and charm the pants off of everyone she meets, and it's just so much fun. We've started watching the Muppets together, which is great. We've got 6 DVDs of Muppet episodes from various years. Watched the Steve Martin one together yesterday, and she thought the excuse me bit with the arrow through the head was superb. Those of you who follow my Twitter stream or Boing Boing or my own blog will have seen that right after I got back from New York, Thomas Gideon, the command line as he goes by in podcasting circles, released a tool called Flashbake that we'd worked on together, which is to say I told him some stuff that I thought would be cool and he made it. I didn't actually do any programming. He created this thing called Flashbake for me that stores all of my writing in a source control repository as I write it. So every 15 minutes or so my writing projects and my to-do list are added as a revision to this source control repository, which gives me a lot of kind of backwards insight into my writing process. It also records the last 3 Boing Boing headlines under my byline, and also the weather where I am, the city where my clock is set to, the uptime on my computer, and a few other bits of information as context, so that later on when I'm trying to remember kind of what was going through my head when I wrote a given paragraph, I can just go back and see that. He's working on a plugin architecture for it next, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get a plugin together that will also record the last 3 songs played on my music player, which is a really lovely free software product that I use called Banshee, which would be even more fun. Yesterday I was down at the National Union of Journalists and British Photography magazine's demonstration at Scotland Yard. There's just been a law introduced that makes it possible for the police to charge you and put you in prison for up to 10 years if you take a picture of a policeman in a way that might be of assistance to terrorists. Now, this is so broadly and vaguely worded that it's just begging to be used selectively to prosecute people with politically unpopular ideas, or in all the ways that selective legislation is used. So I thought it was pretty important to go out to, and it was fun to be out at a demonstration. You can see some photos from that in my Flickr stream. Let's see, what other good news? Well, I got email from the Tejas High School reading list. This is the it's the Texas school reading list, and it's the most influential of all the school reading lists in America, to say that Little Brother had been added to it, and that means, fundamentally, among other things, tens of thousands of book sales, because schools just order scads of the books that are on these reading lists, which is just great news for me, I tell you what. Some upcoming speaking things that you might want to catch me at. If you're in London, there's a couple of things coming up. On the 24th, I'm speaking, strangely enough, at a Tory think tank, the Policy Exchange, on a panel called Piracy, Do We Need It to Rescue Our Creative Industries? I'm opposite someone from NBC and a kind of super conservative MP, and I'll be speaking alongside of the new director of the Open Rights Group, Jim Killick. On the 28th of February, I'm on a panel at the Convention on Modern Liberty. This is the Guardian newspaper's new conference on modern liberty, and I'm on the closing plenary with, of all people, Billy Bragg, which should be kind of cool. On the 26th of February, I'll be at Open University. I'm going to be doing a day's talks. If you are attending OU, or if you can dial into OU, you'll be able to see that. And then on March the 6th, I'm headed to Milan for the Meet the Media Guru event. I didn't name it, but should be fun and should be interesting to see some of Milan. I've never been there before. My wife and daughter are coming out for the weekend too, which will be great. Well, anyways, that's the news that's fit to print. And so after that, I will just get back to this novel I'm reading to you. Someone Comes to Town, Someone Leaves Town. Kurt lived in the back of a papered-over storefront on Oxford. The front two-thirds were a maze of peeling, stickered-over stamped metal shelving units piled high with junk tech, ancient shrink-wrap software, stacked-up low-capacity hard drives, cables and tapes, and removable media. Alan tried to imagine making sense of it all, flowing it into the inventory, and felt something like vertigo. In a small hollow carved out of the back, Kurt had arranged a cluttered desk, a scuffed twin bed, and a rack of milk crates filled with t-shirts and underwear. Alan picked his way delicately through the store and found himself a seat on an upturned milk crate. Kurt sat on the bed and grinned expectantly. "So," he said. "So what?" Alan said. "So what is this? Isn't this great?" "Well, you sure have a lot of stuff, I'll give you that," Alan said. "It's all dumpstered," Kurt said, casually. "Oh, you dive?" Alan said. "I used to dive." It was mostly true. Alan had always been a picker, always on the lookout for bargoons, especially if they were sticking out of someone's trash bin. Sometimes, even if they were sticking out of someone's trash bin. Sometimes, especially if they were sticking out of someone's trash bin. Seeing what normal people threw away gave him a rare glimpse into their lives. Kurt walked over to the nearest shelving unit and grabbed a PC mini tower with the lid off. "But did you ever do this?" He stuck the machine under Alan's nose and swung the gooseneck desk lamp over to it. It was a white box PC, generic commodity hardware, with a couple of network cards. "What's that?" "It's a junk access point. I made it out of trash. The only thing I bought were the network cards, 2 wireless, 1 Ethernet. It's running a FreeBSD distribution off a CD, so the OS can never get corrupted. It's got a lot of sweet stuff in the distro. All you need to do is plug it in, point the antennae in opposite directions, and you're up. It does its own power management, it automatically peers with other access points if it can find them, and it does its own dynamic channel selection to avoid stepping on other access points." Alan turned his head this way and that, making admiring noises. "You made this, huh?" "For about $80. It's my 15th box. Eventually, I want to have a couple hundred of these." "Ambitious," Alan said, handing the box back. "How do you pay for the parts you have to buy? Do you have a grant?" "A grant? Shit, no. I've got a bunch of street kids who come in and take digital pics of the stuff I have no use for, research them online, and post them to eBay. I split the take with them. Brings in a couple of grand a week, and I'm keeping about 50 street kids fed besides. I go diving 3 times a week in Concord and Oakville and Richmond Hill, anywhere I can find an industrial park. If I had room, I'd recruit 50 more kids. I'm bringing it in faster than they can sell it." "Why don't you just do less diving?" "Are you kidding me? It's all I can do not to go out every night. You wouldn't believe the stuff I find. All that I can think about is all the stuff I'm missing out on. Some days I wish that my kids were less honest. If they ripped off some more stuff, I'd have room for a lot more." Alan laughed. Worry for Edward and Frederick and George nagged at him, impotent anxiety, but this was just so fascinating. Fascinating and distracting, and, if not normal, at least not nearly so strange as he could be. He imagined the city gridded up with junk equipment, radiating internet access from the lakeshore to the outer suburbs. The grandiosity took his breath away. Look, Kurt said, spreading out a map of Kensington Market on the unmade bed. I've got access points here, 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 and here. Another 8 or 10 and I'll have the whole market covered. Then I'm going to head north, cover the U of T campus, and push east towards Yonge Street. Bay Street and University Avenue are going to be tough. How can I convince bankers to let me plug this by their windows? Kurt, Allen said, I suspect that the journey to University Avenue is going to be a lot slower than you expect it to be. Kurt jutted his jaw out. What's that supposed to mean? There's a lot of real estate between here and there. A lot of trees and high-rises, office towers and empty lots. You're going to have to knock on doors every couple hundred meters, at best, and convince them to let you install one of these boxes, made from garbage, and plug it in to participate in what? Democratic communication, Kurt said. Ah, well, my guess is that most of the people who you'll need to convince won't really care much about that. Won't be able to make that extra abstract notion concrete. Kurt mumbled into his chest. Allen could see that he was fuming. Just because you don't have the vision to appreciate this... Allen held up his hand. Stop right there. I never said anything of the sort. I think that this is big and exciting and looks like a lot of fun. I think that ringing doorbells and talking people into letting me nail this access point to their wall sounds like a lot of fun. Really, I'm not kidding. But this is a journey, not a destination. The value you get out of this will be more in the doing than in the having done. The having done's going to take decades, I'd guess, but the doing's going to be something. Allen's smile was so broad it ached. The idea had seized him. He was drunk on it. The buzzer sounded, and Kurt got up to answer it. Allen craned his neck to see a pair of bearded neo-hippies in Rasta hats. Are you Kurt? One asked. Yeah, dude, I'm Kurt. Marcel told us that we could make some money here. We're trying to raise bus fare to Burning Man. We could really use the work. Not today, but maybe tomorrow, Kurt said. Come by around lunchtime. You sure you can't use us today? Not today, Kurt said. I'm busy today. All right, the other said, and they slouched away. Word of mouth, Kurt said, with a jingling shrug. Kids just turn up looking for work with the trash. You think they'll come back tomorrow? Allen was pretty good at evaluating kids, and they hadn't looked very reliable. Those two? 50-50 chance. Tell you what, though, there's always enough kids and enough junk to go around. But you need to make arrangements to get your access points mounted and powered. You've got to sort it out with the people who own stores and houses. You want to knock on doors, Kurt said. I think I would, Allen said. I suspect it's a possibility. We can start with the shopkeepers, though. I haven't had much luck with merchants, Kurt said, shrugging his shoulders. His chains jingled, and a whiff of armpits wafted across the claustrophobic hollow. Capitalist pigs. I can't imagine why, Allen said. Wales Avenue, huh? Kurt said. They were walking down Oxford Street, and Allen was seeing it with fresh eyes, casting his gaze upward, looking at the lines of sight from one building to another, mentally painting in radio frequency shadows cast by the transformers on the light poles. Just moved in on July 1st, Allen said, still getting settled in. Which house? The blue one with the big porch on the corner. Oh, sure, I know it. I scored some great plumbing fixtures out of the dumpster there last winter. You're welcome, Allen said. They turned at Spadina and picked their way around the tourist crowds and shopping the Chinese importers' sidewalk displays of bamboo parasols and Hello Kitty slippers, past the fogged-up windows of the dim sum restaurants and the smell of fresh pork buns. Allen bought a condensed milk and kiwi snow cone from a sidewalk vendor and offered to treat Kurt, but he declined. You never know about those places, Kurt said. How clean is their ice anyway? Where do they wash their utensils? You dig around in dumpsters for a living, Allen said. Aren't you immune to germs? Kurt turned at Baldwin, and Allen followed. I don't eat garbage, I pick it, he said. He sounded angry. Hey, sorry, Allen said. Sorry, I didn't mean to imply... I know you didn't, Kurt said, stopping in front of a dry goods store and spooning candied ginger into a baggie. He handed it to the age-hunched matron of the shop, who dropped it on her scale and dusted her hands on her black dress. Kurt handed her a $2 coin and took the bag back. I'm just touchy, okay? My last girlfriend split because she couldn't get past it. No matter how much I showered, I was never clean enough for her. Sorry, Allen said, again. I heard something weird about that blue house in the corner, Kurt said. One of my kids told me this morning he saw something last night when he was in the park. Alan pulled up short, nearly colliding with a trio of cute university girls in wife-beaters pushing bundle buggies full of newspaper-wrapped fish and bags of soft, steaming bagels. They stepped around him, lugging their groceries over the curb and back onto the sidewalk, not breaking from their discussion. "What was it?" Kirk gave him a sideways look. "It's weird, okay? The kid who saw it is never all that reliable, and he likes to embellish." "Okay," Alan said. The crowd was pushing around them now, trying to get past. The dry goods lady sucked her teeth in annoyance. "So this kid, he was smoking a joint down in the park last night, really late after the club shut. He was alone, and he saw what he thought was a dog dragging a garbage bag down the steps of your house." "Yes?" "So he went over to take a look, and he saw that it was too big to be a garbage bag, and the dog, it looked sick. It moved wrong. He took another step closer, and he must have triggered a motion sensor because the porch light switched on. He says—" "What?" "He's not very reliable. He says it wasn't a dog. He said it was like a dried-out mummy or something, and that it had its teeth sunk into the neck of this big, fat, naked guy, and it was dragging the fat guy out into the street. When the light came on, though, it gave the fat guy's neck a hard shake, then let go and turned on this kid, walking towards him on stumpy little feet. He said it made a kind of growling noise and lifted its hand like it was going to slap the kid, and the kid screamed and ran off. When he got to Dundas, he turned around and saw the fat guy get dragged into an alley between two of the stores on Augusta." "I see," Alan said. "It's stupid, I know," Kurt said. Natalie and Link rounded the corner, carrying slices of pizza from Pizzabilities, mounted high with eggplant and cauliflower and other toppings that were never intended for use in connection with pizza. They startled on seeing Alan and Kurt, then started to walk away. "Wait," Alan called. "Natalie, Link, wait." He smiled apologetically at Kurt. "My neighbors," he said. Natalie and Link had stopped and turned around. Alan and Kurt walked to them. "Natalie, Link, this is Kurt," he said. They shook hands all around. "I wanted to apologize," Alan said. "I didn't mean to put you between Krishna and me. It was very unfair." Natalie smiled warily. Link lit a cigarette with a great show of indifference. "It's all right," Natalie said. "No, it's not," Alan said. "I was distraught, but that's no excuse. We're going to be neighbors for a long time, and there's no sense in not getting along." "Really, it's okay," Natalie said. "Yeah, fine," Link said. "3 of my brothers have gone missing," Alan said. "That's why I was so upset. One disappeared a couple of weeks ago, the other last night, and one this morning. Krishna," he thought a moment, "he taunted me about it. I wanted to find out what he saw." Kurt shook his head. "Your brother went missing last night?" "From my house. So what the kid saw—" Alan turned to Natalie. "A friend of Kurt's was in the park last night. He says he saw my brother being carried off." Kurt shook his head. "Your brother?" "What do you mean, carried off?" Natalie said. She folded her slice in half to keep the toppings from spilling. "Someone is stalking my brothers," Alan said. "Someone very strong and very cunning. 3 are gone that I know about. There are others, but I could be next." "Stalking?" Natalie said. "My family is a little strange," Alan said. "I grew up in the North Country, and things are different there. You've heard of blood feuds?" Natalie and Link exchanged a significant look. "I know it sounds ridiculous. You don't need to be involved. I just wanted to let you know why I acted so strangely last night." "We have to get back," Natalie said. "Nice to meet you, Kurt. I hope you find your brother, Andy." "Brothers," Alan said. "Brothers," Natalie said, and walked away, briskly. Alan was the oldest of the brothers, and that meant that he was the one who blazed all the new trails in the family. He met a girl in the 7th grade. Her name was Marcy, and she had just transferred from Scotland. Her father was a mining engineer, and she'd led a gypsy life that put her in stark contrast to the 3rd-generation homebodies that made up the rest of their class. She had red hair and blue eyes, and a way of holding her face in repose that made her look cunning at all times. No one understood her accent, but there was a wiry ferocity in her movement that warned off any kid who thought about teasing her about it. Alan liked to play in the marshy corner of the woods that bordered the playground after school, crawling around in the weeds, catching toads and letting them go again, spying on the crickets and the secret lives of the larvae that grubbed in the milkweed. He was hunkered down on his haunches one afternoon when Marcy came crunching through the tall grass. He ducked down lower, then peered out from his hiding spot as she crouched down, and he heard the unmistakable patter of urine as she peed in the rushes. His jaw dropped. He'd never seen a girl pee before, had no idea what the squatting business was all about. The wet ground sucked at his sneaker, and he tipped back on his ass with a yelp. Marcy straightened abruptly and crashed over to him, kicking him hard in the ribs when she reached him, leaving a muddy toe print on his fall windbreaker. She wound up for another kick, and he hollered something wordless and scurried back, smearing marsh mud across his jeans and jacket. "You pervert," she said, pronouncing it, "Ya pervert." "I am not," he said, scooting back. "Watching from the bushes," she said. "I wasn't. I was already here, and what were you doing? I was just minding my own business, and you came by. I just didn't want to be bothered. This is my place." "You don't own it," she said, but she sounded slightly chastened. "Don't tell anyone I had a piss here, all right?" "I won't," he said. She sat down beside him, unmindful of the mud on her denim skirt. "Promise," she said. "It's so embarrassing." "I promise," he said. "Swear," she said, and poked him in the ribs with a bony finger. He clutched his hands to his ribs. "Look," he said, "I swear I'm good at secrets." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, I suppose you've got lots of secrets, then." He said nothing, and worked at keeping the smile off the corners of his mouth. She poked him in the ribs, then got him in the stomach as he moved to protect his chest. "Secrets, huh?" He shook his head and clamped his lips shut. She jabbed a flurry of pokes and prods at him while he scooted back on his butt, then dug her clawed hands into his tummy and tickled him viciously. He giggled, then laughed, then started to hiccup uncontrollably. He shoved her away roughly and got up on his knees, gagging. "Oh, I like you," she said. "Just look at that. A wee tickle and you're ready to toss your lunch." She tenderly stroked his hair until the hiccups subsided, then clawed at his belly again, sending him rolling through the mud. Once he'd struggled to his feet, he looked at her, panting. "Why are you doing this? You're not serious. This is the most fun I've had since we moved to this terrible place." "You're a sadist." He'd learned the word from a book he'd bought from the 10-cent pile in front of the used bookstore. It had a clipped-out recipe for liver cutlets between the pages, and lots of squishy, grown-up sex things that seemed improbable, if not laughable. He'd looked up sadist in the class dictionary. "Aye," she said, "I'm that." She made claws of her hands and advanced on him slowly. He giggled uncontrollably as he backed away from her. "Come here, you've got more torture coming to ye before I'm satisfied that you can keep a secret." He held his arms before him like a movie zombie and walked toward her. "Yeth, Mathda," he said in a monotone. Just as he was about to reach her, he dodged to one side, then took off. She chased him, laughing, halfway up to the mountain, then cried off. He stopped 100 yards up the road from her. She doubled over with her hands planted on her thighs, face red, chest heaving. "You go on then," she called, "but it's more torture for you at school tomorrow, and don't you forget it." "Only if you catch me," he called back. "Oh, I'll catch you. Have no fear." She caught him at lunch. He was sitting in a corner of the schoolyard, eating from a paper sack of mushrooms and dried rabbit, and keeping an eye on Edward Frederick George as he played tag with the other kindergartners. She snuck up behind him and dropped a handful of gravel down the gap of his pants and into his underpants. He sprang to his feet, sending gravel rattling out the cuffs of his jeans. "Hey," he said, and she popped something into his mouth. It was wet and warm from her hand, and it squirmed. He spat it out, and it landed on the schoolyard with a soft splat. It was an earthworm, thick with loamy soil. "You," he said, casting about for a curse of sufficient vehemence. "You!" She hopped from foot to foot in front of him, clearly delighted with this reaction. He reached out for her, and she danced back. He took off after her, and they were chasing around the yard, around the hopscotches and tag games and sand castles, and out to the marshy woods. She skidded through the puddles, and he leapt over them. She ducked under a branch, and he caught her by the hood of her windbreaker. Without hesitating, she flung her arms in the air and slithered out of the windbreaker down to a yellow t-shirt that rode up her back, exposing her pale freckles and the knobs of her spine, the fingers of her ribs. She took off again, and he balled the windbreaker up in his fist and took off after her. She stepped behind a bushy pine, and when he rounded the corner, she was waiting for him, her hands clawed, digging at his tummy, leaving him giggling. He pitched back into the pine needles, and she followed, straddling his waist and tickling him until he coughed and choked and gasped for air. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me your secrets." "Stop," Alan said. "Please, I'm going to piss myself." "What's that to me?" she said, tickling more vigorously. He tried to buck her off, but she was too fast. He caught one wrist, but she pinned his other arm with her knee. She heaved, and she collapsed on top of him. Her face was inches from his, her breath moist on his face. They both panted, and he smelled her hair, which was over his face and neck. She leaned forward and closed her eyes expectantly. He tentatively brushed his lips across hers, and she moved closer, and they kissed. It was wet and a little gross, but not altogether unpleasant. She leaned back and opened her eyes, then grinned at him. "That's enough torture for one day," she said. "You're free to go."